Enoch Mgijima is well known as a Xhosa prophet and evangelist. He was born in 1868 and was the youngest of 9 children. Mgijima was born in Bulhoek, which is located 25 kilometers southwest of Queenstown. His family was among the Mfengu people who accepted land from the British in a buffer zone named Ntabelanga or Bulhoek. Like many Mfengu families in the area, the family had settled there after the Mfacane and Frontier Wars. Christianity played a major role in the survival of the Mfengu people after the Mfacane Wars. On 14 May 1835, the Mfengu people gathered under an old milkwood tree in the Paddy district, in the presence of Reverend John Ailiff, and swore an oath to obey the Queen, to accept Christianity, and to educate their children. This agreement became known as the Mfengu Oath. The Mfengu, who are now Wesleyan, soon moved to Grahamstown, where they fought on the side of the British in the 8th Frontier War of 1850 to 1853, and were rewarded with land, Cornerstone, of which Bulhoek and Ntabelanga were part of, was an overcrowded township where most of the people struggled to make a living. The Mgijima parents raised their children as Wesleyan and Methodist and sent them to missionary schools. The Cornerstone school had classes up to standard 3, which is grade 5. Josiah Mgijima, the father of Enoch Mgijima, encouraged his sons to study further. 3 of them went to Lovedale Institute in Alice and to Zonnebloem College in Cape Town. Timothy and Josiah served as interpreters in Zimbabwe, then Rhodesia, while Charles, before joining the Israelites, was a court interpreter and school teacher. Enoch, on the other hand, had left school at standard 3 because of severe and constant headaches that reoccurred each time he went to Lovedale and never went beyond. He became a farmer and hunter. He also became a Methodist lay preacher. In 1907, Mgijima had his first vision in which an angel said to him, "I have sent you to these people because I am worried that although they worship me, they are not honest in their worship to me. I want you to worship me according to your old traditions." Close quote. He ignored those visions and kept on preaching as an evangelist and subsequently acquired a large following. At the very heart of the Israelites' mythology and legend lies a belief held by both its original followers as well as the current congregants that Mgijima, then 39, and just another member of the Wesleyan Church had a life-altering visitation from the Almighty in 1907 in the form of a human figure. In 1910, the Union of South Africa was formed and the world witnessed an interesting phenomenon in the form of Halley's Comet. Enoch Mgijima was inspired by the comet and even said that he had predicted its coming and he felt that his vision had been confirmed. To him, this was a sign that God was angry with humans and that they should return to their Old Testament beliefs. In 1912, Mgijima broke away from the Wesleyan Methodist Church. Mgijima's visions were frowned upon. It was around this time that Mgijima had received a visit from John Isaac Massecre, a man who had just came back from studying theology and anthropology. Massecre came with an instruction from Pastor William Saunders Crowdy in the United States. William Crowdy was a runaway slave, a soldier and the founder of the original Church of God and Saints of Christ, the world's oldest Black Hebrew Israelite religious denomination that was founded in 1896 in Kansas, USA. The congregates performed rites based on Old Testament, including baptism, the consecration of bread and water as Christ's body and blood, and foot washing. The church is known as the oldest African American congregation in the United States that adheres to the tenets of Judaism. William Crowdy sent an emissary to organize locals in at least 6 African countries. The congregants later established locals in Cuba and West Indies. Mgijima was instructed by Msikinyana to leave the Wesleyan Methodist Church, and Mgijima began baptizing his followers, whom he called the Israelites, in the Black K River. In the same year of 1912, Mgijima joined the Church of God and Saints of Christ, a small church based in the United States of America. The church observed the Sabbath on Saturday, held services 4 times a day, and had the Passover in mid-April as their main festival. On December 22, 1912, a few months before the introduction of the Native Land Act of 1913, apportioning 80% of the country's land to 5% settler population, Mgijima's Israelites were born. Towards the end of 1912, Mgijima prophesied that the world would end on Christmas Day after 30 days of rain. His followers, gripped by this vision, stopped working their lands and prepared for the future. The prophecy did not come to pass. However, Mgijima's visions only grew more intense and over time more violent. When the leaders of his church asked him to renounce his preachings of conflict and war, he refused and was later excommunicated from the Church of God and Saints of Christ. In 1913, the Land Act forced Africans out of prime fertile land and sharecroppers of white farmers and divided South Africa into black and white areas. Under this particular law, whites were allocated the best available land and Africans were dispossessed of their ancestral land and found it more and more difficult to make a living of what was left. Post the Union of South Africa saw a proliferation of independent movements. The reason for the formation of independent churches included several political factors such as colonialism, imperialism, and land dispossession. In 1914, the South African Church of God and Saints of Christ split, and a new independent Israelite movement was born under Mgijima's leadership. One of the prophecies that led to his expulsion was a prophecy of World War I. He saw a vision of two goats fighting and a baboon washed nearby. He interpreted it as a war of whites, where black Africans will not be involved in that war. This was later known to be a universally known fact as the First World War of 1914 till 1918. However, many black Africans fought in the war, both in the East African Campaign, World War I, and outside of Africa as part of British and French colonial forces. Mgijima was granted permission to host the event at the Silo Mission Station in 1917. However, in 1918, his request was denied and Mgijima had to search for an alternative venue after the mission station denied him permission. This was due to the fact that one of the followers had broken a mission station rule, which decreed that only evangelists could lead church meetings. A new location was found at Ntabelanga in the Bulhoek subsection. The permission came with a strict condition. His followers had to leave as soon as the celebration was over. But in 1919, a new prophecy marked a turning point. About 3,000 people arrived at Ntabelanga believing that the end of the world was at hand and they were to wait the Lord's coming. They began to squat on the property, erecting huts and a tabernacle without permission or payment. Ntabelanga was chosen as a holy site because it is the same mountain that Josiah Mgijima, the father of Enoch Mgijima, had gone to pray and request the Lord to give him boy children. He climbed to the top of the mountain and prayed, "God, you have given me these sheep, cattle, goats, and horses, but I have no boy among the children." Josiah Mgijima's prayers were answered as he was blessed with 4 boys: Josiah, Timothy, Charles, and Enoch. Ntabelanga became a place where God heard people's prayers when they called on him in their time of need. In 1912, Superintendent G.E. Nightingale discovered the encampment after visiting the area in January 1920 and asked Mgijima about it. Mgijima assured him this was a temporary arrangement and the squatters would move as soon as the Passover of 1920 was over. This did not happen as more Israelites gathered on the land. Mgijima extended the period and informed Nightingale that the Passover would take place on 8 June 1920. A census was planned to get the squatters to move from the area. On 7 and 8 December 1920, Senior Magistrate of Queenstown, ECA Welsh, visited Ntabelanga accompanied by 100 police officers under the command of Major Hutchins from Grahamstown. The police force set up their tents 500 meters from the Israelites. The Israelites refused to take part in the census, claiming that God knew their numbers. Mgijima, caught between his prophecies and the authorities, made excuses. He claimed his followers were sick and had no money, but his true reason was far more profound. He had called them to wait. The Israelites, having given up their worldly possessions in anticipation of Armageddon, grew desperate and began to steal livestock from nearby farms since they had no source of income. The white farmers of nearby Oxkraal complained when their grazed land was no longer available for their cattle to feed. The farmers complained bitterly, and they said the Israelites were stopping their workers from carrying out their duties. A crucial incident took place. 3 Israelites who said they had gone to a nearby farm to buy fodder, and they were thought to be trespassers and were shot at by the farmer, John Massecre and his foreman, Mr. Klopper, who were both arrested but later released. 1 Israelite got away. John Gelenjani was wounded and Charles Dondolo was killed. He was later to be called a saint by the Israelites. The police took a statement from Gelenjani and several of the Israelites, including Charles Mgijima. They were subpoenaed to appear in court. However, they saw no reason to do so and refused. This meant that the case against Massecre and his servant Klopper had to be deferred more than once, and ultimately the case was struck off the roll. After a group of influential missionary-educated Africans from the Eastern Cape, comprising of J.T. Jabavu, Meshach Belem, Patrick Tabanisa, and Chief Velterman, was sent by the government to mediate this brewing dispute between the Israelites and the government. This was followed by a group of high-ranking government officials that eventually met with the Israelite leaders in Queenstown on 17th December 1920. However, the meeting was a futile exercise. By 1921, there were about 3,000 Israelites living at Ntabelanga. They came from all over the country. The newly appointed Native Affairs Commission, sent by Prime Minister Jan Smuts, sat down for a meeting between 6 and 8 April 1921, with Charles Mgijima, Enoch Mgijima's brother, nephew, and another high-ranking church member. The meeting was unsuccessful as the Israelites continued to occupy the land. On 21st May 1921, with an 800-man strong police force assembled in Queenstown, Colonel Truter sent Mgijima an ultimatum to evacuate the Israelites that were squatting on the land by 23rd May 1921. In response, Mgijima sent Selwane Nkapo and Samuel Matsoba to deliver a letter to Colonel Truter. In the letter, Mgijima reiterated his refusal to move from the land and reaffirmed his faith in God to resolve the matter on the Israelites' behalf on 22 May 1921.
To Enoch Mgijima and all associated with him and styling themselves Israelites at Ntabelanga, you are hereby notified that upon instruction of the government, I have come to Queenstown and will arrive at Ntabelanga on Monday the 23rd instant with adequate force. You are warned, however, that any resistance to lawful authority will be drastically dealt with. Commissioner, South African Police, Queenstown.
I understood that you, sir, were coming out with an adequate force, and if resisted, will drastically deal with. We are here praying to the God of our fathers. Therefore, we do not believe that Jehovah will allow it. I have been praying the government about this matter for a very long time, until now, and am still praying the government to allow the Israelites to pray to their God. You are informing us that you are coming out with an adequate force. Do you mean that you are coming to war against the God of Israel? If you then, sir, Mr. Truter, are coming out to make war, please inform me. I shall then write or say my last word before you destroy me. Yours faithfully, E.J. Mgijima.
The government, determined to restore order, sent a force of 100 police officers to the location. The Israelites refused to submit, declaring that God's authority was greater than men's, and this was his land. The negotiations failed, and the police retreated, but the tension remained. The local community feared revenge attacks, and the government in Pretoria refused to send reinforcement. On 24 May 1921, the government forces took their position on the hills surrounding Bulhoek. Armed with machine guns, a cannon, and artillery, an 800-strong police force led by Colonel Johan Davy and General Koos van der Venter stationed at the Ntabelanga mountains. They were stationed at the Bulhoek Valley and Stevens Valley. Despite final attempts at negotiations, the Israelites refused to move. Mgijima's men, about 500 strong, armed with clubs and spears, stood ready to clash in Bulhoek. Despite a final attempt at negotiations, the Israelites refused to move. The battle started when the police force opened fire on the Israelites, killing 2 of Mgijima's men, and the Israelites retaliated. The battle was brief and brutal. At the end of the 20-minute battle, an estimated 163 people died, 129 were wounded, and 95 were taken as prisoners, including Enoch Mgijima. The trial of the 141 Israelites began in November 1921. They were charged with violent and forcible conduct against the authority of the state. Enoch Mgijima, his elder brother Charles, and Gilbert Matsoba was sentenced to 5 years hard labor at the De Beer convict station in Kimberley. A few were given suspended sentences, but the remaining 129 Israelites were sentenced to between 12 and 18 months hard labor. Mgijima was released from prison in 1924 and returned to leading the Israelites until his death on 5 March 1929. The African elite at the time had differing opinions on the Bulhoek massacre. John Dube, one of the founding members of the ANC, was quoted in the Kokstad Advertiser on 17 June 1921 as saying, "When we consider that Enoch and his followers were not breaking any law of the land, but only a location bylaw regulating the number of huts which may be built on an allotment, the tragedy suggests a sad mishandling of a serious situation." The African newspapers, Imvo Zabansundu and Umthetheli Wabantu, founded and edited by J.T. Jabavu, were harsh to the Israelites. The publications blamed the incident on the Israelites' inability to respond to the government's call to evacuate the land. J.T. Jabavu wrote on the 31st of May 1921, "If governments were wise, they would closely watch movements with this root of bitterness before it becomes prosperous as Mgijima's at Ntabelanga." The tragedy of Bulhoek remains a dark stain on South Africa's history. Was it a fight for land and self-rule against a paternalistic and segregationalist government? Or was it a fanatical religious movement that endangered its followers and the surrounding community? The answer perhaps lies somewhere in the complex intersection of faith, politics, land, and power.